So firstly, I hope everyone is staying safe and keeping well in these very strange and uncertain times. Today, myself and Aubrey are going to be talking about the ever-evolving concept of product engineering. Now, for myself and Aubrey, we're very passionate about this subject because we've worked in big and small organizations, primarily from a transformation perspective. And we see the common approach to transformation and the way teams are structured and face into customer value being around having the product owners and the engineers, and that kind of gap in between, that delta in between. And we really believe that product engineering gives us that opportunity to think differently about how we operate, that we can really create a highly lean and agile environment moving forward. We also believe that this is going to be even more kind of needed once COVID is over, so post-COVID, because we're going to be in a world where customer behavior will have radically changed, and we're unsure on how they're going to use and consume products. So being in a space where we can rapidly innovate and move forward and try things for customers is going to be really important. So the first thing before we get into the presentation, we'll do a brief introduction of myself and Aubrey, just so you can get a flavor of who we are. So firstly, for myself, my name is McThomas. I'm a coach currently. I started my career off at Sky as an engineer. I moved through Sky, became a product owner, then became a Scrum Master for the interactive television part of the organization. And I helped them transform their ways of working from waterfall to something that was bespoke, but it was very much like a less type structure. Once I left Sky, I've moved a whole host of organizations in a number of different sectors. So that's from Lloyd's to GSK to Vodafone to Nationwide. And I really enjoyed going into a new organization, learning the organization, the business, the customers, and really helping them figure out what success looks like in terms of ways of working. Aubrey, do you want to give a quick introduction for yourself?
Sure. So I'm Aubrey Stearn. I'm currently an interim CTO. I definitely enjoy that space. I'm probably more wartime than peacetime, so interim makes sense, fighting fires and fixing interesting problems. I've worked for a number of different companies nationwide, Travelodge, Pizza Hut, some Arcadia, some biggish names, and some small startups that maybe nobody's ever heard of. I guess, again, I like fires. I like things that don't work properly. I like, to put it one way, giant shit shows. That definitely seems to be the thing that I thrive in fixing. And I really love good culture and independent teams and sort of magical thinkers. So I'm always looking to, product engineering is definitely something close to my heart. It's about, for me, increasing that agility and independence of engineering and removing some of the bottlenecks we traditionally find with having a product owner role that almost, in a lot of sense, stifles engineering from reaching their full capability. So, Dave, let me hand back to you. And
awesome. So the first thing we'd like to discuss today is what is a product engineer from our perspective. And I've structured this slide on purpose because what we typically see, as I said earlier, in organizations and the way we're set up, Agile is quite prevalent in a number of companies and organizations. And the common setup we do see is we have product owners and we have engineers, and that's separation between them. I'm not saying it's a complete separation. Of course, they come together, they work together, but there is still that separation, that dependency that exists. Now, what we're saying from a product engineering perspective is it's someone who knows the product deeply, it really cares about getting close to the customer and understands the business and the goals that they're striving towards, and is able to engineer solutions in order to fit the needs of the customer. So they're there to bridge that gap between product and technology in order to delight the customers. Now, both myself and Aubrey go into organizations to support them on their transformation journeys and help them to kind of build what success looks like. And in the space of product engineering, we have a number of behaviors, mindsets, and ways of thinking that we look out for that tell us that someone would fit quite comfortably into the product engineering space. So we thought we'd share them with you today. So the first one is someone who's a disruptive innovator. someone who looks beyond what the customer currently needs and finds things that they don't even realize they need yet. Someone who's really passionate about being close to the customer. They care about having that intimacy and that empathetic connection with the customer. Someone who's a second order thinker, so they don't just look at things locally, but they're really interested in looking at things from a systemic perspective and looking at things across the board. Someone who's got a really good growth mindset, so they're really keen to learn new things and open to new ideas. And actually they see things like failure as a good learning point, and they're quite open to that experience. Someone who's really honest, and honest in the challenging times is important. So when I say challenging times, I'm talking about those times where your honesty goes against the grain of what everybody else is saying. Now, first of all, culturally, it's creating a safe space for that to happen, but also it's about making sure that, you know, people can be honest and share those different perspectives, because it really just promotes that high shared understanding where we can work effectively together. We want someone to be a coach and a mentor. So obviously we're all concerned about our own personal growth and kind of how we're proceeding. We're also someone who cares about the team growth as well. They're there to coach and mentor other people in the team and really support them on their journeys. Someone who's really good at communication. So you can imagine interacting with stakeholders, interacting with customers. It's translating those very complex subjects into easy to understand information that they can resonate with. And someone who can cultivate relationships quite quickly and establish those relationships for the long term. Now, when I talk about this, I realize that this sounds like a unicorn flying across the screen. What we're not saying is that everybody's going to have everything here. Of course, that very rarely happens. But what we are saying is these are the lenses we look through in order to identify and to strike good balance. We focus on habits and behaviors first because when we look at hiring people, we want to hire people to build the capability internally. So if we're hiring someone externally, we want to hire someone who's already shown that they're a product engineer in the way they're thinking and the way they're doing things. Because when we bring them in, that really helps us create that incubation space internally that helps the people who are currently at the organization move forward on that journey. The last point I will say around this piece is this is not for everyone. Product engineering is not every engineer will want to move into this space. And of course, we would never force anyone to do that. If we are building these teams, we just need to make sure that we understand how everybody wants to operate. And if this isn't for them, we do our best to help them be successful somewhere else. So some of us may be asking ourselves, so what about the product owner? So this piece really is, we're promoting a shift really in the product owner, and we're really looking to shift this into a product coach stance. And we want to first change the language and the way we think about this person by changing the language. So from product owner to product coach, a coach is there to support people, to help them learn, to help them grow, and to really build that capability. And we want them to build that capability so it results in high self-organization in order to make decisions that satisfy customers and help the business. We want these product coaches to also turn their experience into questions and insights so people can learn from that. So it's not about giving the answer, but it's about turning your answers into questions. Again, we understand that not every product owner will want to go on this journey, and some may already be quite far on this spectrum. I've worked with a handful in the past that have already been in that coaching stance, but it's not for everyone. And it is a journey, and every organization is unique, and we take that into account. The next piece is, well, what does a product engineer need to actually do product engineering? So the first piece here really is to have a good set of qualitative data and to be close to the customer. So when I say qualitative data, it's having face-to-face conversations with customers. It's the understanding how they use the product, how it makes them feel, and creating that understanding of what the real need is underneath of the customer. The other side of that is the quantitative data. And the quantitative data is the data around how the customers actually use your product. So if we imagine a fully instrumented product, we have a large number of data points where customers are doing things and not doing things, and we're capturing all this information. And it's about rolling up that information into clear insights that help the product engineers create data-driven decisions. They're having hypothesis-driven focus for themselves, and they're able to rapidly experiment as well, as long as the infrastructure is there that allows them to do that. So what I'll do is now I'll hand over to Aubrey, and Aubrey's going to talk a little bit around some stories of where she's working currently, but also focus on some of the leadership elements as a CTO, what it's like to be in this space when you're trying to cultivate this product engineering capability. So
thanks, Dave. That's a great cover, because I'm definitely in a space where we're not currently doing this in full force, and we're really trying to establish that new engineering capability. So actually, that's a great intro for me. I think we need to move on to slide. Yeah, so Oakham is an interesting company that I'm working for at the moment. We're a high-cost, short-term credit lender, which means we lend to consumers who potentially have like not so great credit. We have a heritage of about 13 years of untested code written in VB and many other languages by probably, I don't know, definitely over 30 or 40 developers. 9,000 stored procedures that don't live in source control. 3 distinct front-end technologies and 400 plus SQL tables, and none of it's documented. So how do you go from that to something high performing? So this is a slide that I created because I remember talking to Richard James at Nationwide and expressed my, I don't want to say misery, but my sadness, great sadness at how initiatives seem to slow down without me pushing them, or they didn't have as much gusto as when I was around. And really that's about momentum. And he said to me, one of the great burdens of leadership is that when you start these initiatives, Aubrey, it's like pushing a rock up a hill, and you're going to be doing it until you've created enough momentum for that rock to start rolling on its own. I think I paraphrased there, but there are some tools that are quite useful along the way to help you get there. And behaviors is a really good example. So everything we do and say as leaders creates behaviors. And a really good example of those behaviors, I like to use the dashboard example. So when we say the solution to something is to create a dashboard, what does it do as a behavior? Well, it creates a bum on a seat looking at a monitor. And it's probably one of those expensive behaviors that you can go and create. For me, very negative. So that's definitely one that I think carefully about saying, a dashboard is the solution here. And then belief as well. So as a leader, I come in, I consume the business goals and dreams and objectives and the things that I want to do, and I hand crank some sort of vision that goes along with a technical strategy, and I pitch that to the team and say, look, I'm someone you can believe in, this is the vision, hopefully you all believe in it, and we're going to go and get there, and I'm part of the vehicle that's going to get us from A to B. And if there is no belief in me as a leader, then it's going to be a much harder struggle to continue pushing this boulder uphill and creating this momentum. So belief is a really important part. Now, shared language is something I can give a great concrete example of this, but for me, this reduces interlocks, it reduces misunderstandings, it reduces things that potentially can go wrong and handoff. For me, it helps us as a team realize value much quicker. And a great concrete example was yesterday morning. I spent about an hour with some of my engineers talking about our application process, and particularly something called sign up, which doesn't really exist for us. It's just a side effect of running an application through. But it took about an hour with those engineers to get to a shared understanding of what sign up meant to us and what a customer entity was and how that was created, when it was created. And this was all around whether we would create a customer for a failed application, or whether what was the value in that. And so just spending that good hour talking about the life cycle of these entities and the meaning of them, both to us as a group and to the business, and the value to customers, becoming a customer entity, was incredibly useful. I don't think that we're likely to have that conversation again for a while, and I would definitely trust everybody involved in that conversation to make similar decisions because of that shared understanding. Now, I remember talking about the T-shaped engineer and that being somewhat of a unicorn. It's a thing that we're all chasing. And I actually prefer the M-shaped engineer. I think that's even more of a unicorn shape to go and achieve. But this is the idea of an engineer with multiple vertical depths. And this is our ability to traverse these depths in order to tell the horizontal story, the full horizontal story. This is true second order thinking. So I can do maybe front end, I can do back end, I can do cloud infrastructure. And that helps me start tell an incredible breadth of story. And then also knowing that I have colleagues that can tell something maybe more to the left or more to the right of that means that we have together incredible depth. And it means there's definitely going to be less handoffs between us, less times that I'm waiting for the right person to come along because I don't have a skill set. So M-shaped engineers, they definitely exist, much harder to create, definitely something that I try and breed. But I would say it takes the right sort of person. And Dave touched on this earlier, you know, some folks definitely don't want to do this. For some folks, it's too much. For some folks, they'd rather be master of one of those depths and no others, and that's completely fine. That these are a special breed of people that just continually push themselves and look for those new depths. And so some things probably you want to look for in those folks. So engineering greatness, like if you're going to pull off product engineering, you're going to need some really great technical folks. So the kind of folks that do 100% test coverage, the test in production, that want to reduce every single piece of friction between pushing code and getting it to a customer to realize value. So, you know, I don't believe in environments unless you're regulated and you have to have air-gapped environments and it's PCI DSS or something like that, then I would like to see you go straight to production and start thinking about removing those safety nets that you have that prevent you from thinking in a particular way. Infrastructure as code for me actually falls into shared language. So if you're a front-end person and you actually, you know, by making the infrastructure as code is available, it means that those folks can start looking at that and diving in and create new vertical depths for themselves. I think that's incredibly important, and to not hide it behind you know, a wall. But for us, we've seen this actually quite recently in our team, the ability to convey something visually. So using Adobe XD to be able to create maybe a prototype application or extend your application in a way and visually convey an idea means that I don't have to go and hand off and say, oh, I'm waiting for this person because I'm not able to express myself visually or in a way that makes sense in our application framework. So having those skills in the front end, you know, I'm not the best React developer in the world, but I can do React, which is super useful. So again, reduces those friction points and handoffs, even as a CTO. And then business tycoon, this is a huge point. Understanding the business and the domain that you work in. So I work in high cost short-term credit. I've had to learn the SEA rules around lending, about how much we can lend and how much we can charge in terms of interest without doing a breach on some of those rate caps. I've understood what we've built as a company and our history, how an amortizing loan works. All of that was probably my first 2 weeks. So I was able to speak to the business and understand, I guess, their goals and aspirations and the heritage there. People alchemy, and I've shamelessly stolen this again from Richard James at Nationwide. I remember him telling me that he was a people alchemist, and I love this term. I will eternally love this term because I think it's something that as leaders we do all the time. We try and take those magical people and blend them together and hope that we get the right kind of outcome that we're looking for. And I think this starts with the right kind of leadership and the right kind of network to go and bring those M-shaped engineers together. And then I think, you know, you tend to find that those engineers know other engineers that are probably the same shape, and then you start to hit that second rung of the network, and those folks start bringing people in. And so it's just about knowing that first rung of people to bootstrap an initiative, and then you sort of end up with the right kind of thing afterwards. The master plan at Oakham was I spent roughly 2 months as a CTO building a technical strategy, understanding the business, learning this stuff. So it was really 2 weeks. And then that sort of turned into 2 months to get the depth of the system that I needed to understand how to rework it. Build that tech strategy that sort of helped us to, or will help us to achieve the goals that the business wants to achieve this year. This is a small team sport, so I don't think this works particularly well at scale. I don't think this works in a particularly hierarchical organization where folks need to go and sign off on things. I think this is something where you want to federate that permission or that freedom for an engineering team to take those choices that will affect customers. And again, maybe you're not comfortable with that as an organization, but for me, this is definitely a small team sport. High agility. In fact, the team that I'm working with at the moment, we don't do stand up anymore. We tend to swarm several times a day around problems. So there's so many touch points, we just don't even need to do that stand up. And delivery in segments. So the Oakham example, this is something where I had to go and find the right kind of segments to unlock the initial agility I needed to go and build the trust in me as a leader to go and get to the, I guess, the last part of the year. So something that we've used probably extensively during this COVID situation is Miro. Miro is a collaborative tool that allows you to do diagramming and mapping together, and you can see other people's cursors. So we use this extensively to go and create diagrams of distinct parts of the system and to share the understanding with the engineers that have been in the organization for past a year about how they thought things worked in the system. And we did this with people from the business who weren't in engineering, and we ended up with a really interesting understanding. And everybody had a different one to start with, but we ended up with one unified understanding of how these pieces of functionality actually worked and how tangled up they were. And then we took those little pieces of maps, we created a big map that showed the touch points between those systems. And that helped me to understand where I would start to perform surgery on a system and how I'd start to take things apart. So the example that I would use is that those three distinct front-end technologies were an absolute pain and were going to be a pain. We don't actually have people that are able to work with some of them. So collapsing them into a single React application felt like the right thing to do because those folks are easy to come by and it's a turnkey technology. We can go and present that in a mobile application and to web, so we get some instant benefits there. We introduced something called a node shim. So this was an API that essentially passes through and calls the heritage API. And what it allowed us to do was to defer what would normally be serial calls for every step of the application. So if you create an Oakham loan, you will do 5 steps of our application, and each one will call through to the server and send some stuff. By using the shim, we're able to defer all of those calls until the end of the application, keep all of the application data for the customer in the Redux store on the client. And then it means that if we wanted to move step 5 to step 1 or step 2 to step 3, we would now decouple from the restrictions of that legacy API. So instant agility that allowed us to start doing MVT and A/B tests immediately, that with that now belief that my technical strategy was sound, unlocked the rest of the year to go and focus on refactoring.
So let me unmute myself for the last piece. So the last bit really, that was great, Cher Aubrey. And what Aubrey's sharing there is a real example of the value you get by facing into things from a product engineering perspective. Both Aubrey and the product engineers who exist at Oakham have really been working together in this way in order to make those leaps and bounds in terms of changing the technology and meeting the demands of the customers as optimally as possible. So why pursue this? Like, why are we sharing this? Why is this important? So there's really 3 areas we believe this really creates value for people and organizations. One is it creates a flatter hierarchy. It removes that dependency on the product owner and their decisions and what they want the teams to do. It creates the shared product ownership and promotes that equal voice across the team. So everyone's got that vested interest in the product's growth. It creates greater agility because we actually move the decisions for what we're doing for our customers to source right as close to the value going out to the customers as we possibly can, which means we remove waiting, but we also start to see experimentation and validation culture start to emerge. As long as you've got the technology to back it up, the team starts to think in this way. And again, when I worked at Oakham with Aubrey, as soon as we started those mapping exercises and as soon as we started to shift the needle on that product engineering viewpoint, the energy and the motivation of the team just went right up. People were coming up with suggestions on how we could change the journey, how we could satisfy customers. So even just opening up that space in a small way led to much more motivation from the team. And the final piece is it distributes innovation. So it's not about innovation happening here in a little bubble, a part of the organization that innovates and then tells the engineers what to do, but it distributes it to source again, which drives motivation, it shifts mindsets, and it really enables us to meet the demands of our customers. And what we're really saying here is, we're not talking about agile, but we are talking about getting greater agility. So the more friction we can remove, the more dependencies we can remove, the greater agility we have in everything that we do. And we really believe product engineering is a step forward in this space. So I believe that's us. All we'd say is it's been difficult to cram this into 20-25 minutes. So if anyone is interested in more information, because there is more information around this, you're more than welcome to reach out to myself or Aubrey and kind of have a conversation.
Aubrey, David, thank you very much for that. Great talk. Had quite a few questions come in, so I will be asking those at the end. I am now going to hand over to Edward Mason, and his talk is Agile, why are we doing this again?
Okay, right, let me just share this, which says the deck. Cool. Can you see a deck?
We can.
Excellent, good. Then I'll begin. So, a brief introduction on me. My name is Ed Mason. I've been working in Agile software space for quite a while now, about 12 years. I have a background as a software developer, where I was before I then moved out of that into more of the team side of things. In terms of why you're listening to me, firstly, because I'm here, but I have a very strong delivery focus on all of the teams that I work with. I've learned a lot of valuable lessons over the years, and I'd be really happy if something that I say is able to help someone and saves you a bit of pain and saves you a bit of time. With that, I will start on. So, what I wanted to cover today is why are we doing Agile again? I don't intend for this to be any kind of, I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. Agile came along, it was adopted, the Scrum training went through the roof. Lots of people wanted to take it on. More recently, I think a lot of different people have a lot of different understandings as to what it is and what they should be using it for. Also, some of the people who were there at the beginning as well have come out to try and kind of almost give a bit of a reset. And I think this is really just to kind of try and establish just a kind of reminder of what it was in the first place. That might not suit what you want to do with it now, but just to have a common understanding of why the whole thing came about. So I'll cover over what it is, why I think it has a bad reputation and where some of that has come from, things we should be focusing on. I'll touch a little bit on scaling and transformation just because it's a topic that often comes up, but that really that will be very brief, and then a quick summary. So, first off, why Agile? Why do we do Agile? I often have this discussion with teams to try and get their attention and remind them. And to me, it's that simple. We're doing Agile software development to get stuff done, to get working software in front of customers, where we get the value from. Simple as that. In my view, and I'll explain why, what Agile is. Agile is simple. Agile in itself, as it was originally defined, really is simple. If you can stop laughing or raising your eyebrows, bear with me, I'll explain. So, a little bit of history. And I'm not trying to give a lesson here, but like I said, I think I really want to try and get everyone on the same page as to where this came from. This was a process that was developed by a bunch of leading software engineers 20 years ago. It was a process that was created by developers, and as one of them recently said in his latest book, it was a small idea for small teams to solve small problems. That's what they were trying to deal with. They weren't trying to come up with a whole new way to reinvent the industry. Just going to say that because I want you to kind of bear that in mind as we move forward. So what is the problem with it? Why has it got this bad reputation? So I'm sure everyone here has seen the manifesto. I've put it in this slide. I am not going to read it. It's not my intention to go through it. but I do want to explain why I think in part it's very misunderstood. First time I saw this, I thought it made a lot of sense, but in the 12 or so years since, I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of people, and I can see that, yeah, in some regards it's ambiguous, and I can see why people have misunderstood it. So you've got 4 statements, things on the left, over things on the right, and if you look at the original web page, it says underneath, that is, while there is value to the items on the right, we value items on the left more. From a lot of discussions that the people who were there initially have kind of said since, you know, hindsight's a great thing. They might have finished it by saying, that is, while there is values value in items on the right, we value the items on the left more, but there is still value in those items on the right. They weren't trying to dismiss them out of hand and say they don't matter. One of the first things people often say about Agile is, oh, well, you don't design or plan in Agile. There's no documentation, those things don't exist. If you actually look on the Agile Manifesto website itself, there's a history subpage. It's quite long, it's quite wordy. But even in there, they say, yes, you do need documentation. Yes, you do need planning. So it has been quite bad, quite significantly misunderstood. Those statements, though, don't describe how to write software at all. It was a room full of software engineers, and it's worth bearing in mind. They'd been there for 2 days, and those 4 statements were pretty much the core thing that they could agree on. There were people there who were already doing XP, there were people there who were already doing Scrum and many other development ways. That's what they managed to agree on. It doesn't tell you how to write software. Scrum does have a great definition, but it focuses on the lifestyle instead. One of the guys who was there is a guy called Ron Jeffries, and he wrote not a very long book, but a book called The Nature of Software Development. And I think this is a much better starting point if you actually want to talk about developing software. He talks about starting from business value, because as I said, the whole purpose is to get things done. And we are there mostly as workers for a business, for that business to generate revenue and create value for their customer. So he looks at Agile software development this way. You start with business value for the company, prioritized across all of its systems. What you're working on this week for the highest value you can get might be different to the service that will give you the best return next week. Business value gets broken down into features, features get broken down into stories, and stories are given to teams. Those teams are cross-functional, using quality software practices, working through their release cycles. Now that statement glosses over an awful lot of technical detail, but I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with some of it at least. So this should, I'm hoping a lot of this makes sense. And the last point, the most simple thing, they regularly deliver new features into production to the customer. And I think in this model, Agile is simple. You basically have a to-do list. You have a team that has all the skills it needs with no dependencies to get it done. They take the top thing off the list, they create it, they put it into production. They go back to the list, it goes into the team, it goes into production. That is a simple model. So why does it have a bad reputation then? Many implementations of Agile fail. Many are successful, but those aren't the ones you tend to hear about. And a lot of failures are often due to these reasons. Also, just a slight caveat, I'm not saying these are all of the reasons. I'm not saying this is what always happens, but a lot of the reasons are quite common. Many people implement it not really understanding why they're doing it or the nature of software. They think if they implement this framework, then they'll be fine. They focus very heavily on the process. And I have seen this in more organizations than I care to honestly remember. When the process isn't working and people aren't getting the results they expect, they double down on the process. They say the process isn't working, we're clearly not doing the process right, let's more process. but they're missing the reasons that the process isn't working in the first place. So still it doesn't work. They're not delivering to the customer, they're not getting stuff done. People often think that you implement Scrum and you become Agile. And as the previous talk alluded to, that's not the case at all. You're trying to create agility. Implementing a framework on its own is not going to achieve that. So a lot of places have tried to implement it, it hasn't worked, and it's got a bad reputation for that. A blunt version of why a lot of these things fail. Agile is a very particular way of working, as I've already given an example of. To-do list, teams, production. Most organizations are simply not set up that way. They are not that kind of shape. They're rife with dependencies, and whilst you can get a very short-term gain by implementing some of the most common Agile frameworks, very quickly they will highlight issues outside of the control of the team that the team cannot resolve, cannot fix. The whole thing grinds to a halt. To give an example of this, a very simple hypothetical made-up example. Say you have this shape of an organization where the whole organization is split into separate departments. So sales, marketing, product management, technology, and so on. Say you want to introduce a new billing model into this kind of organization. Who owns that? Well, maybe sales do. I don't know, maybe it's someone else. But whoever owns it has got to manage all of these different departments, get a buy-in from them to get their time to be able to work on this. You know, classic kind of model, and it's going to be quite hard work. But what if you had an organization that was a different shape, and you could create a brand new team to implement your new feature that had representatives of every aspect of the company that it needed? I'd suggest in that case that your new billing feature is going to be a lot easier to implement because you've got a bunch of people who know what they need to do, they're in a position to do it, and they can get stuff done. So it's important to realize that some organizations are that shape, they can easily change into that shape. A lot of organizations aren't. And if you take an organization of that's shape 1 and you try and force a working pattern of shape 2 onto it, it's not going to end that well. The next slide is, I just call it this because I thought it was fitting. Dependencies kill software development dead. You'll drag along for a little while, but as soon as one of your teams has a core dependency on another team, if it's the team that sits next to them and they're kind of part of the same project group, that might not be too bad. You've still got the extra work now of liaising with another team who already have their own to-do list and backlog of work. But if you're kind of in the same project, you can probably manage that reasonably well. If that dependency is across a program boundary or it's into another part of the organization, whatever it might be, life's going to get very tricky and slow very quickly because they're going to have completely different priorities to you. They've got their own targets, their own agenda, and they may simply not have time to be able to fit in what it is you need from them. How am I doing for time? End. A very quick side note on this, just as an example. Something that happens quite often in large organizations when they first think about implementing Agile is they do a trial and they handpick a load of, not necessarily experts, but let's say good people with good domain knowledge of their area. They take them all, they put them into a new team, completely outside of all of the usual structures on its own. And they give them a problem to solve. Not necessarily a business critical problem, just a little kind of thing to tinker around with. They give them a week or two, and more often than not, they smash it out of the park. It's a complete success. You know, the whole thing has been proven to be, you know, a great way to go. The next stage, though, is they go back into the organization and they then create other teams. Maybe they're not quite as well skilled, but that's okay. But those teams are now sitting within the normal organizational hierarchy and structures and problems that were always there. They give those teams pieces of work and they immediately run into all the problems that they always have done. People aren't appreciating that they were operating in a completely different standalone model. They try and do it in the shape that things have always been, and it doesn't work. So that's all well and good, but almost all projects you work on are going to have dependencies. So what do you do? As I've said, if they're small and local dependencies, you've got a good chance of managing them. But to truly remove dependencies from an organization is an organization level challenge. To truly do it properly, the organization needs to change its shape, kind of as an example from the shape 1 to the shape 2 that I talked about earlier. It's a very interesting thing that, as I've said, the Agile Manifesto is a fairly straightforward thing. Even Scrum doesn't mention dependencies. Some of the scaling frameworks do, but at that level, they don't mention them. Which is why a lot of people start off very positively and then realize there are problems. If the only thing you take from this is that you realize that you have dependencies and they're going to cause your agile software development problems, that's a really good thing to have in your head and be aware of, because it is going to hit you. The link at the bottom is a link to an article on my blog where I talk about a suggestion of how you could actually manage those things in the real world. And actually that derives from a RAID, which most projects kind of have, so it's not a bad starting point. So having gone through a lot of the theory in the background and why things don't work, where should we focus? You want to focus on why you're doing this process, what it is you're trying to do. And what you're trying to do is create software that delivers a business value. You're not there to follow a process or a framework. Frameworks are great. I am a big fan of Scrum in its place. And I think its place is as a new introduction to teams and companies who've never done any of this before. I think it's a really, really good starting point. But when people often start it though, and they try to follow it too dogmatically, the process is there to help you and to help you deliver the software you're there to build. It's not there to get in the way. Once teams start to become familiar with it, if there's things you want to change, if there's things you need to tweak, if there's things you want to get completely rid of, do it. Whatever helps your team deliver is the right way to go. A side note, and this is all I'll say on the matter, and I'm sure a lot of you who have an engineering background or engineers are going to kind of smirk or roll your eyes, because this is a whole talk on its own. Agile in this definition is software. If you want the benefits of business agility by writing software in an agile manner, you have to have the software practices of XP across all your teams. If you don't, you'll go along for a little while and then your problems will start to exponentially rise and it will bite you and things will start to slow down very, very quickly. You can't get away from that. Sorry if you think you can, but it will bite you very quickly. I'll very quickly expand on that. The reason I say that is that I'm sure a lot of you have heard phrases like, it's too hard to estimate, the code base is a puddle of mud, we're too scared to change anything, change takes too long. That is an indication that your software practices for a long time, I'll be polite, could have been better. If you follow a lot of the steps that are in XP, a lot of those problems just go away because your software will be regularly maintained. The design is always being looked at. It's not going to get unnecessarily bloated. It'll be in the best shape it can be for you to be able to make changes and continue to get value from your product. So the second point of where you want to focus, there's three things: teams, backlogs, working tested software. We've talked about cross-functional teams and having teams in the shape 2 organization type way where you have a bit of everyone you need. Backlogs, we haven't specifically talked about. I'll just cover this quickly. If you truly want business agility across your organization, the organizations that do this well, they have one backlog across the whole organization. And I know that sounds nuts if you haven't seen that, but they do have it. Because otherwise you suffer the problem that I talked about earlier. Team A is doing this over here, and it's absolutely their number one priority, but they now have a dependency on Team B over here. But they've got a completely different list of priorities, and actually your piece of work is actually priority 37. So Team A is pretty stuck. That's why that backlog is so key. Also, the clarity of the definition in the stories. Again, stories is probably another, well, it certainly is another talk on its own. I've already said you have to have XP. If I can promise you a second thing out of this whole talk, the quality of the software that a team can release in an increment, whether it's a sprint, a week or 2 weeks, doesn't matter. The quality of what they can release is equal to the story that goes in. And I promise you, if you put a crap story in, you will get crap software out. There is no way around, or it'll take about 6 weeks instead of 2. The work that the team are being given to do has to be well understood, and the team have to have seen it and understood it and digested it before. Those things can give you working tested software, which again is what the whole thing is about. It's why we're here. We want to get value in front of the customer. Very quickly on scaling, bearing in mind, going back to the start, no, they weren't trying to define a scaling framework. It can be scaled. There are frameworks to do it, and places have done it very successfully. An interesting point someone made recently is Agile was created to solve problems with creating software. They were of the view that problems of managing large teams were solved a long time ago. And to be honest, kind of agree with them. We have bridges, we have airplanes, we have very tall buildings, taking thousands and tens of thousands of people all working together. Managing teams has been happening for a long time, but the process of creating good software hadn't been around for a long time. If you do want to think about scaling and transformation, be aware it's going to need everyone up to the very top, because it's going to be a big change. It's going to need a big push, whole new approaches to how organizations work. And you're going to be dealing with people, which is always fun and challenging. Those politics, their empires, changing job descriptions. That is many, many talks and possibly several libraries all on that one subject. I don't want to run over time. So, the summary of everything I've just gone through. Agile itself is simple. I genuinely believe, and I will defend that it is. I will very quickly admit, however, organizations are not. Organizations are complex. And fitting the two together is where you hit the problems. Just remember, whatever stage you're at, whatever problems you're facing, whether you're buried deep in dependencies or you're stuck in an overly complex Jira workflow, your primary and only focus is always to get stuff done and get value in front of the customer. And that's that. Back to you, Alex.
Thank you very much, Edward. Very good. Right, I've had a fair amount of questions come in for both. So I'm going to do my best to get through them. So I will start with
I think we may have lost you there.
Yep.
Either
that was incredible timing, though. Yeah, absolutely incredible timing.
Oh no!
Oh, no.
Oh,
in fairness, we might have lost him 10 minutes ago. We just didn't know.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I think we've lost Alex, but a couple of questions have actually come through to me, so I'll kick off and start some of them. I'm one of the consultants and one of the Bernard. My name is Sina Farmazi. So the first question is actually to Aubrey and David. As a PM trying to get back into work, what Agile safe courses would you recommend and why?
Dave, you field this because you know how I feel about safe.
And yeah, you may be asking the wrong person. My personal viewpoint is steer clear of safe. It depends. It depends on your personal intent. If you literally just want to find a safe job out there because there are so many great, if you have true belief in the framework, it's a different conversation. I can't recommend any safe courses because I have no certifications in safe whatsoever. I would just say, like, think about the intent of why you're trying to do it. Like, do you even need a certification in the first place? Do you already have that knowledge in order to support teams and help them move forward? Or is this something to kind of open a door and have a conversation? Without knowing more context, it's it's difficult for me to give advice other than I hold no stock with safe whatsoever. Apologies, that's not the answer you're looking for.
Question: what is safe?
Scaled Agile for enterprise.
It's basically an amalgamation of a bunch of methodologies into one, so it can be sold to organizations that are large. So you're talking about, you know, it's got a lot of like old like Kanban manufacturing, like the House of Lean, stuff like that inside of it, Scrum. It's kind of been bundled together as this will save your organization. But
yeah, it took a few years to figure out it didn't work and cost you a bunch of money.
Yeah, in practice, it doesn't give you agility, right? It doesn't allow you to move quickly, make decisions quickly, and satisfy your customers in a short period of time, because there's a huge middle management layer that's built into it. And I can do a separate talk around this if it's really interesting, but it's heavy on middle management, and it doesn't really connect senior leadership with the teams. Whereas you want to probably move towards more of a go-see leadership approach. So you're connecting your senior leadership with the people who are actually delivering value. That's going to give you a much more high-performing environment than safe would ever give you.
You're still talking about. Sorry, I'm down the other end. I'm down the other end. You know, so I'm beyond release. I've been typically beyond release management. You know, second line support, environment support, application support, that kind of thing. Sort of resolving problems. Sort of typically, you know, we're getting tickets in from the help desk, and we're shouting at developers. You know, so we're then waiting for announcement requests to come through, and then, you know, I've sometimes screamed at a developer saying I need this, and I'm saying where's the DERF to get it in, and I'm waiting for it to get into production.
I think, Alex, you're used to working at a very different end of the spectrum, and I think if you listen to the talks when we said it's a small team sport, your question around, you know, where does a support technician or sysadmin sit in this? The answer is really simple to that one. It doesn't, like, they don't have a role. So I don't have QAs in my team. I don't have testers. I don't have people that do releases. Every single person on the team is responsible for all of these things. And it's like having folks in support, right? We don't have anybody dedicated to supporting the application. We support the application. And the reason we do that is because if you know, for example, if your boiler broke at home, and you had to go and call your landlord and say, hey, my boiler's broken, it takes 3 days to fix it. You know why it takes 3 days to fix it? Because they don't feel your pain, right? They don't give two fucks about you. The reason we run teams like this, and reason we move the onus of like support and then deployment, all those things onto the team, is because it gives you that direct feedback, right? You feel that pain one-to-one with your customer, which is how we manifest this sense and this thinking around product engineering. I feel the customer's pain directly, and so I'm going to react to that problem with much more intent and speed and honesty than I would if it was coming down the chain because somebody was like yelling at me from support.
So it would sit more in, say, within a software as a service context, as opposed to when we used to get CDs or tapes, and then we'd receive gold software and then build for our platform, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're conflating a few different things here, but what we're talking about is a team of developers. I want to say that they do everything, right? So from building that software for customers to deploying that software in the real world to, you know, an example in my team is that we've just spent the last week instrumenting everything we've built for AWS with AWS X-Ray, because I know that when we put this thing live, we're on the hook when it goes wrong, right? So are logs enough? You know, do I need to understand the tracing through the system? I know the system hits several legacy systems, so How will I figure out that goes wrong? These are all questions that we asked up front, because ultimately, like, we're supporting the product, right? So if that was a traditional development environment, more than likely you would have seen that software go out without any of that instrumentation and wait for support to start calling, going, oh, it's not working, right? And then you would take that feedback and go, oh, we'll go and do something, right? But because we're on the hook for it, we already know, we have first-hand experience of these problems. So it's like, okay, how are we going to solve these things we know are going to happen?
So that's why people who are graduating now are much more developers, and everyone's being asked to be a developer. Whereas I went through, and I've done, I mean, my career path has been second line, third line support, then into capacity planning, hosting, and then I was made redundant, you know, sort of, because mine went offshore.
Well, if you look at the folks that still do Cisco, like switch, like stuff, switching, and all of those people that do Juniper stuff, right? How many people understand how the FPGA in one of those switches works? Right? Hardly anyone. This is because you're literally at the point in time where if you do that sort of stuff, you're either going to be working for a cloud provider or a very big organization. This stuff moved into a software SDK. Like, for every single cloud, there is no hardware specific optimization. It's software SDK, it's software defined networking. It all shifted, and it's happened so quickly. So many folks were still left in that other domain and had missed that this had become a software practice as opposed to a traditional practice that it was for a very long time, with hardware and hardware qualifications. That, like, the boat happened, it moved so quickly that so many people got left behind.
And I think I have as well. Thanks very much.
And also finally say on the point around, if you're interested in knowing around scale frameworks in the agility space, like, the only one I could recommend really is the LESS framework, because the LESS framework is focused on that go-see leadership and bringing the leadership much closer to the teams that are delivering value. So if there's anyone I was going to suggest, that would be the one I would suggest for you to look at.
I just interject. I think there's another one worth looking at too, which is Scrum at Scale, Jeff Sutherland's attempt at scaling. It's much simpler and easier to fit in, and it also engages the business. Just very simply, it adds an EAT layer, which is an executive action team to help take impediments and issues away to make the rest of the organization help fit around a scaled agile.
Definitely not a plug by a big consultancy organization at all.
I'm leaving IBM very shortly.
Sorry about the connection failed.
But it's Scrum at Scale. We don't use it at IBM, but it's something worth you guys looking at.
Thanks, Al.
Okay, perfect. We'll move on to the next question. Thanks for that, by the way. So the next question I have is to Aubrey and Dave again. It's on horizontal story. Is this mostly development before it gets to release management and removing safety nets? And what about ITIL?
So it's a full life cycle of what we're producing as software. So from a customer's perspective, what is that feature that I'm building, and how will I build that as an engineer? And because as an engineer, I'm now responsible for supporting that in production, I already know that I'm going to have to go and debug this thing. So how am I going to do that? How am I going to instrument my code? How am I going to build the thresholds in that tell me when something's going wrong with that code? And then I'm going to release it. So I need to understand the pain of releasing, and I need to build those pipelines. And it's understanding the full story from beginning to end. And you don't have to have full depth in each one of these verticals, right? You don't have to be Bob Ross. You don't have to be the best UX designer in the world, but having some understanding of it is important, because at some point you're going to look at that instrumentation. Maybe you've added something like full story to your front end and say, oh, look, there are outliers over here on the screen, and they seem to be struggling a little bit, and they take longer than other people. Like, why is that? It turns out my postcode lookup doesn't work quite the way I thought in Formic, and I need to do something else here. And so, again, you're instrumenting these things, you're able to go to tell that story, and then you can go back to that piece and say, well, actually, if we change the UX to look something like this, it would make more sense. And at no point in that do I have to go and defer to somebody else. right? That horizontal, at no point do I have to go and hand off and say, I'm stuck, I don't have the skill set to do this. All of the metrics are available to me, all the tracing is available. As an engineer, I'm fully in control of how I go and push this software to production, and also how I find out that things are wrong with it. So when we say full horizontal story, it's really talking about that full life cycle of the thing that we're building, including that product thinking. You know, what's the North Star for the feature that I'm building, and does it align to those organizational goals and the objectives that the organization wants to build? This is why I almost don't agree with if you put a story in with not enough detail, then you'll just get shit out every time. It's not true. You know, if you understand your organizational North Stars and you are in that product engineering space where you're thinking about, okay, how are we moving this forward for the customer? How are we delivering value? How are we moving this product closer to what the customer needs and what the organization wants to achieve? You know, even with a really simple couple of line story, I'm sure you can go and create something absolutely magical and push that thing all the way to a customer and deliver and unlock value.
I think touching on what Aubrey said there, I think it's the shared understanding of the team, like the feature itself and how it's defined is less important as long as you've got this team sport where people are coming together. You've got that people alchemy piece where they can have those conversations and they can deliver that value to customers. We don't want people spending their time filling out loads of detail on these feature stories because we want it to be a close team sport. We want to promote conversation. And the more we divert attention into these tools where they've got to write an essay on something, the less they're spending time talking to each other and actually delivering value.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much for that, guys. I've got one more question, and then I think Alex has some as well. So this question's actually for Ed. It's around, I often see comments along the lines of implementing Agile is an organizational change. What can be done as someone who is receptive to presentations like this one, but is not in a position to affect that organizational change? For example, a developer rather than a VP of software engineering.
So what you can do at a team level is work on improving your engineering practices. Your code base, and people are working with code bases that haven't followed these practices, for decades. Every single small improvement you make is going to make your life easier over time. With enough of them, they'll start to snowball. Get the team more interested, if they're not, get the team more interested in good code practices. Try to influence as many things as you can within the team. Make the improvements at that level. You're going to struggle when you hit dependencies on other teams, but there's still a lot they can do in terms of their own processes, their own quality, to start making their day-to-day life a little bit easier.
Thank you.
And actually, sorry. What then often happens from that is other teams will start to see the improvements that you've made as well, and they might come and it starts a conversation then with other teams, and then hopefully that effect gets bigger and bigger. Sorry, Alex.
No problem. Really sorry, guys. Of course, my internet connection went down at the key moment for me to ask some questions. So if you did ask me a question, Zoom wiped it all. So if you do want me to ask some, just ping some over now. But I've got one here for you, Ed, because they are flying in. Do you, I'd say to you, do you find even the description from Ron Jeffries to be bloated? Do we really need to spend time defining features or stories, etc.? What is the cost in spending the time doing this versus delivering value? Often it's a busy focus, but doesn't truly deliver value.
So I'll give an answer, and then I'll actually let Aubrey and David have an answer, because I think they'll have a view on this as well. So again, what Ron Jeffries defined is a framework. It's an idea. It's not something to follow religiously. If you're in a position where you know what you want and you don't have to be accountable to anyone in terms of what gets created in the order of it, fine. Create what you know you need. I think the steps that he defines are useful when you've got an organization that has certain requirements, but the reality is a lot of organizations, they want to have an idea what it's going to cost up front. They want to know what their return on investment is going to be for implementing something. The business value and the features is usually, so there probably are examples out there, but the vast majority of cases of writing software is to fulfill a business need for an organization, and that's the business value. And it's the business who most typically define what that is. Then that gets broken down into features and so on, because if teams are able to say, oh, well, feature A is going to take you 2 days and it's going to triple your return on investment, people are going to want that. If you say, oh, actually, well, feature 3, that'll be really useful. It's going to take you 6 months and it'll increase your ROI by 5%. The business is probably going to turn around and go, oh, right, okay, well, that wasn't really what we were expecting, so we'll go away and we'll have another think. My answer is whatever works for you. Most organizations, they're paying the bills and, they want to know what they're going to get back for it. In that example, I think it's a good starting point. But like I said, all these things are starting points. You need to find a process that works for the organization and the teams you've got. I'm happy to let the other guys
David.
answer them.
Yeah,
so David, did you want to come back on that?
Ed said something absolutely key there, that it's not religion. And that's the thing to remember, that your agility comes from adapting these things and using the things that make sense. So to use Oakham as an example, for the last couple of months, we have been doing stand-up in the mornings. We have run our reflection every 2 weeks and presented back to the organization to show them the things that we've developed and delivered, because that made the most sense for the organization. During COVID season, we have less people active in the engineering team now. We're moving into a pure play refactoring space where we're not delivering new features to start removing and hacking away at that heritage system. So, again, because we're interlocking so many times a day, we don't need to do stand-up. So I'm probably committing sort of sacrilege according to the doctor, but I'm doing what makes the most sense at this point of time, and I'm adapting these frameworks consistently and using my experience to figure out what makes the most sense. And I made this point earlier, because we understand the product and because we understand the customer, and more importantly, because we understand the business objectives, we can take the simplest story and start unlocking value with that and start delivering something that's meaningful both to the business and to the customer. Understanding the weighting between those two things, because what the customer wants and what the business wants aren't necessarily going to be the same thing. You do need some sort of guidance on where the weight sits between those two things. And I think that's where the business provides you feedback. But certainly with the right blend of people, this is something where, again, it's like I said, it's a small team sport. This isn't something that you do in large enterprise, because I don't think it works so well.
Yeah, just from my side, actually, first of all, this was my question. I'm more than happy to answer it. The reason I asked this question is because you see a lot of this information propagated from the Scrum frameworks and from other sources that, you follow this and it will give you this outcome. And the frameworks do become a religion internally. I've seen it time and time again. People hear about it and then they want to be part of that religion, and it spreads like wildfire across the organization. Nobody really takes the time to stop and say, these are intelligent people. These are smart people. And I have not met any team who doesn't know the challenges they've currently got within their team and are not smart enough to figure out the things that would help them solve it without being told how to use a framework. For me, it slows things down and it creates a very busy culture. We're busy following the framework. We're busy creating stories and we're busy creating features. All of a sudden, we're a feature factory and value is a second order, where really we should be thinking about the value first and worrying about features later, because the features will change dynamically. All of a sudden, you find yourself in a space where you're creating features for 6 months in advance. It's a fallacy. You really don't know which one of those features is going to shift the needle for your customer until your customer uses it. So you should focus on the short term, getting things in your customer's hand so you can learn and adapt. And that's the whole reason why I asked the question, is because I see these frameworks becoming religions for people, and people trusting more in a framework than they do in the actual people who work there. And it's really sad and kind of disheartening to see that happen. And hopefully we can all go back, and if we see this happening, we can start to, trust in the people and their collective intelligence to solve their own problems.
I agree. The point he's trying to make is actually exactly what you described. The business value, he says, business value breaks down into features, and then you pick which bits you want to implement. In his mind, he also says in the book, he doesn't want estimating. He doesn't want any of that, because he wants the team to be delivering every 1 to 2, kind of maybe 3 days. Something tangible, something of value into production for exactly the reasons you specified. And then he said, I haven't seen this, but he says in his experience, people then stop asking for estimates because they know that they're going to get something, they're going to get it quickly, and it's going to be something that's useful, or at least gives them enough information to respond to, as you described.
Yeah, I mean, touching on estimates, the only reason people typically ask for estimates is so they can hold people to account for certain dates and so on.
Oh, yeah. I wasn't trying to start a whole estimates conversation.
Yeah. So yeah, that's another interesting conversation that is annoying.
Yeah. That's one for the pubs when they're open again.
We all do. We all do. Aubrey, another one for you. Are you then following the DevOps operating model?
I don't think there is a DevOps operating model. I always talk about the breed of engineer that we're trying to create, and so yes, having been like a former head of DevOps, which I think is a terrible title, by the way, and still an active engineer that spans everything from product to engineering to the cloud infrastructure and deployment. Yes, it's a synergy, right? You're looking for something bigger than those two elements, the engineering capability and the operational capability, but then you're also adding this customer aspect. And I think, it's something new that we're building here, a different kind of movement. And it's not for everybody. And it's like in the same way that DevOps has been beautifully mangled by so many people, and what once were deployment engineers have become like DevOps engineers. And it's something that I hate. Every time you talk to somebody about DevOps in recruitment, you'll hear about pipelines and Jenkins and little things that sit somewhere over there on the spectrum, and it kind of misses the point. Back to something I said about networking and being able to work close to the metal. We don't do that anymore because everything's an abstract that lives in the cloud, and so you work against the SDK. Things shifted dramatically. Everything is as code. You need to be an engineer. You have to be able to code. I don't think you can get by in just what a sysadmin used to do and rebadge yourself as a deployment engineer. It's definitely more in that DevOps spectrum, I guess, where we're operating. But I would coin that we're creating a different breed of engineer. Definitely not, I guess, what most people's understanding of DevOps engineers are.
So pretty much, yeah. I mean, I'm starting to look at I'm starting to read about stuff like PowerShell, Azure. Yes, it's a virtualization. It's basically what it's almost a replay of the virtualization stuff that we did back in the 80s.
So PowerShell is Microsoft scripting language that sort of exposes those libraries so you can go and do like command line scripting against all those things.
I was there at the beginning of the virtualization curve. So in 2005 we were putting that stuff in. I was writing capacity reports on virtuals, on virtuals, etc. Yeah, so it's almost where now pretty much everyone's running on VMs and it's managing those VMs. Is that the case?
No, so I guess we're conflating several different technologies there. So virtualization is something that happens at some point in technology. Your PowerShell is more akin to like Bash and CLI scripting and what you would do on Nix, and then you have probably the next level of that, which is your containerization, the level after that, which is serverless. There are several things on this spectrum, and we're probably conflating a few over there. Maybe there's bits of PowerShell and Hyper-V mixed in with what you've been looking at, possibly.
Yeah, we literally built. I personally know the person who built the hypervisor Citrix SoftGrid before Microsoft bought SoftGrid and called it @V. I literally I know the person because she was in the same team as me.
Awesome.
Okay, guys, I'm going to come in there. I've got a question for Ed. Ed, you said Scrum was initially created for small organisations. What is your opinion on SAFe, which is implementing successfully by big organisations like banks?
So I said that Agile was created for small teams to solve small problems. Scrum was something else. Scrum already existed before the manifesto meeting, co-created by Jeff Sutherland. Then he kind of beefed it up, and all that training became what we all know and love. I think we covered SAFe in an earlier question, to be honest. My view is the same as Aubrey and David's. Simply because to me, it can be helpful for large, very complex organizations with countless dependencies to manage their software process. To me, it's not an agile framework because it doesn't do anything to try and remove your dependencies. It pretends that you can do a 3-month chunk of work, knowing everything up front, coordinate everything, make a plan, and off you go. Personally, I haven't ever seen that work. It's fundamentally agile. That's just a reasonably short waterfall project. Yeah, but as to David's point, it's so prescriptive, it's so specific. It's an easy thing to sell to large organizations because it covers all the details that they're used to covering in their existing shape of organization. So they see a lot of things they recognize and they kind of go, okay, great. And it's got Agile in the name. Brilliant. I'm being slightly cynical and a tiny bit flippant, but yeah, to me, it takes the status quo and it just kind of puts a mapping across the whole thing into new terms. It doesn't actually try and improve the situation really at all. There's nothing in it about breaking frameworks, dependencies. Sorry.
No problem. Thank you. So another one for Aubrey. You use Micro for a small map. What do you use to create big map?
We still use Miro. So the composition between one of those small maps of understanding a component of the system and bringing together the big maps for us really was just about understanding where was the right place to perform surgery on this, 13 years of development in so many awful Microsoft technologies, which were just boilerplate generated code everywhere. Absolute nightmare to work through. But like, where do you start snipping away at this thing? Where's your likely impact if you're going to take out a significant chunk of that system? We use Miro for virtually everything now. Every discussion we have is around Miro. A lot of our new microservices, we use swimlanes.io to generate some flow diagrams of how data moves between other services as well. So we have very well documented microservices and code generated off the back of them, contract tests between other dependent microservices. Obviously, everything's instrumented with X-ray. There's like N things. So, for folks thinking that Agile means no documentation, that's definitely not true. This is an engineering problem if you don't have documentation. It's also going to be an onboarding problem if you don't write any, because that's the thing that's also going to kill you. Bring in new engineers, you need these high tested systems so that you can go and throw engineers into the deep end and say, next thing you push is going to be to production. And, don't worry, there are plenty of things that are going to stop you from breaking the production system. But, if you do manage to do it, that's a good thing because it shows that we've got a weakness and we'll go and fix that together. But yeah, Miro, I don't think there's another tool that I would use after using this. We did try using the whiteboard thing in Microsoft Whiteboard thing and the one that's built into the Surface Hub and all the Surface things, not so useful. Miro works so fantastically on any Mac or PC and just gives you so much depth to zoom in and zoom out and see huge versions of those diagrams. So yeah, just keep using Miro. I think it's a fantastic tool.
Just to add to that as well, it's a really great thing from a team culture and ways of working perspective, because as soon as you start to model to have a conversation, people really start to get motivated and you start to see things that you wouldn't have seen by just talking about it. So using tools like this to model something, to have that conversation is really important. And it's a key principle of systems thinking. So if you've not heard of systems thinking before or done anything in that space, this is a really useful concept to start to build that kind of overall systemic knowledge of what's happening within your teams as well. So it was great to see some of that stuff.
Oh, also that mouse movement when people start circling around things and it sort of means they don't really know what it means. Like just those mouse movements also translate into so many like unsaid things like I don't really understand this, or like just go and draw that when you see someone trying to draw out part of the system and that, and you can see their like lack of understanding or like unclear understanding of that part of the system. It's good when people pile in, and because it's a team sport and everyone can see everybody else contributing, I think it honestly just feels like you move so far forward so much quickly by doing that when everyone's on the same ground contributing. I couldn't say more great things about that particular tool.
Okay, guys, thank you very much. That is all the questions for this week. Special thanks to David, Aubrey and Ed for your fantastic talks, really engaging, got some great questions coming in. Agile London is back next Wednesday.